Hi, John. I'm Ariana. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Ariana, nice to meet you too.
So, how did you go about researching these types of men groups?
Um, well, I mean, I sort of at one point in, I started finding out about these sort of online masculinity groups or online groups for men only. Um, so shortly after I shot my previous film, and I was sort of fascinated by this culture, and yeah, you know, it was a kind of complicated thing because I was really kind of interested in it thematically and as a subject matter, but it's also something that I have kind of find personally quite problematic. Um, so yeah, it was a combination of researching the sort of online cultures a little bit, and then sort of bringing it together with this idea of the chosen family, which is what a lot of an idea that a lot of queer people kind of have propagated, which is, when you come from a difficult background or a community that won't accept you, that you can find people who are like you and you can form new families, chosen families. So it was a, those two things, kind of bringing them together, and then imagining how they would live and how they would meet and how they would operate and what language they would use. It was fun, kind of inventing this community.
Yeah, speaking of inventing, how did you come up with their symbol and brand that they do?
Oh, it's completely random. I wanted something that was just like really simple and that was so universal that it could really mean anything. And so um, I think I was just kind of doodling and playing around, but the thing that sort of stayed was this triangle with the line through it. But it has no meaning whatsoever. It's and deliberately so. I didn't want it to be invested with like lots of ideas. You know I wanted to be simple. Yeah.
Yeah. And they have a chant that they do, which is very, I can't even say toxic masculinity because colloquially, like masculinity is like really low on the pole of their idea of what a man is. How did you kind of come up with the chant of that they're kind of above everything and they created everything?
Um, it's one of the very first things that I wrote. So it's so long ago, it's a little bit murky, but it's I remember going on a site for men going their own way, which is a group that it's actually fascinating. They've been around forever. They've been around for more than 100 years, and they're now kind of an online group. Um, but they have this sort of idea around the word no, like no as a positive thing, no as something that you go no, like no more, pushing back, no, and and the chant is no, I will not break for you, no, I will not bend for you. So the idea that you kind of use this negative word, this word no, as the starting point for you to for a man to assert himself and to reject the influences that had broken him down. So it was kind of interesting, and it was really just that. It was this idea of like playing around with this word, and then imagining what would be important to them and how they would want to kind of mythologize themselves.
Yeah.
Um, but I like it because there's something a bit petulant as well about the chant. It's almost like a little little boy kind of throwing a tantrum in a grocery store. You know what I mean? Like there's
Yeah.
something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Speaking of their rules, which were actually kind of surprising because I didn't know much about these groups, but when I think of like hyper masculinity, I feel like I also tie that with hyper sexuality and heteros being hetero in a very extreme dominating way, but this group is celibate. Why was that kind of into play that kind of they had nothing to do with women in the sense or sexuality?
Well, I think, historically, if you look at kind of what celibacy does, is it's a the idea is that it's kind of purifying, that by resisting this primal urge, you are able to kind of open up a bigger space in yourself for reinvention or growth or whatever the case may be. So it's uh, it's 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 present in a lot of religious practices, and I think the Proud Boys have a kind of version of it where men don't masturbate or something. So it was just a kind of, and then because of the sexuality of the character of Ralphie, um, it felt like if here's a guy who's kind of grappling with his desire for men, then a space where there's no sex allowed would feel like a safe space to him, like it would almost feel like the kind of antidote to what he was experiencing. So I think it was a combination of those things.
Yeah. Speaking of Ralphie, we see how he consumes food. He very much devours it in a very extreme way. Why does he kind of go about food that way? And even working out, he's very extreme in what he does.
Mm. You're talking about food specifically, how he consumes food. Yeah,
Yes.
I mean, I was there's a beautiful documentary about bodybuilders called Skin So Soft. And I remember there are these incredible scenes in that documentary about men just kind of like it's automatic eating. Like you just got to consume a certain amount of protein every, 3 hours or whatever. So there was just this sort of monotonous, kind of dead behind the eyes um, engagement with food. And it just felt like, here you've got a character who's so kind of hungry and needing something so desperately, but he doesn't really know what it is. And then there's bodybuilding that sort of fills this hole in his life, and yeah, so it was just a kind of an interesting activity to play with um, this person who just can't stop stuffing himself.
Yeah. Why did you make bodybuilding kind of his outlet for his stress?
Um, I think that, well, I mean, I'm sort of fascinated by bodybuilders. I think that there's a kind of a narcissism and there's a homoerotic aspect to bodybuilding that is very interesting. In a way, it's like it's a space where men are allowed to express their vanity in a world that doesn't often tolerate that kind of expression. So it felt like, in a gym you've got essentially straight men who are working on their bodies and checking out the bodies of other men and sort of comparing and looking, and that there was something so kind of inherently gay about that. So I was really interested in the politics and the social dynamics of bodybuilding, and it was a fun world to explore.
Yeah. Do you know how long it took Jesse to kind of create this body for this role and bulk up in that sense?
He was preparing for, I would say, the better part of a year. I don't remember exactly the time. I mean, he also shot a film. He directed a film right before we made Manodrome. So I remember he kind of started and got to a point, and then there was a brief pause, hiatus, and then he got seriously back into it. But yeah, it was a long process, and he did it with a tremendous amount of dedication and seriousness. Um, but it's also, I think, he experienced what I think a lot of people who do this kind of thing experience, which is this feeling of like, oh my god, I'm not where I wanted to be yet, and I'm not, this part isn't good enough, and that, like, he had this suddenly there were all these kind of issues, and I was like, that is perfect. That's Ralphie. You know what I mean? That's exactly who Ralphie is. He's desperately trying to be bigger, more, stronger, like to fulfill this picture in his head, and that he's never getting there. So it was wonderful for Jesse to kind of take all his own anxieties and feelings of inadequacy and to sort of put them straight into the character.
Yeah. Speaking of appearance, Ralphie is very much obsessed with his reflection. We see him literally looking in mirrors. When they're at the store, he's looking at himself on the video camera. How did you integrate his obsession with his appearance, but not make it too over the top and like hitting the nail on the head all the time that he's always looking at himself?
Well, there's a kind of sadness in the character, and that he doesn't know who he is. He's searching for an identity, and he's searching for a self. Um, so it's it really just kind of stemmed from there. That when he looks at himself, in a way, he doesn't see what we see. It's almost like he feels invisible, or he can't make sense of what he sees. So there's something, it's not just kind of posing and admiring himself. There's a real kind of tragedy in seeing Ralphie staring at himself in the mirror, because he doesn't know who that person is.
Yeah. What was it like to shoot a film that didn't have that many females in it, just due to the nature of the film? There's maybe 3 or 4 women that actually show up during the film. What was it like to kind of have to create that environment that was not exactly ideologically, but very similar to these men clubs that you were exploring?
Um, it was something we sort of had to do carefully, because I feel like the film is about men, and it's about men looking at men, or men exploring their masculinity, but there's something also quite sort of blinkered about that. So it was important to me to have a kind of a compelling and an interesting female character at the center of the film, somebody who could kind of disrupt and offset a lot of the ideology that was being imparted by the sort of masculine realm. Um, so yeah, I mean, I'm fascinated by gender in general. I'm fascinated by what happens in all male spaces and all female spaces, um, and I guess the film is very much about that. It's about these kind of all male spaces that are almost kind of overwhelming and claustrophobic. And then there's this world that Ralphie goes back to with Cell, which is about something very different. And I think setting up these different realities is kind of what the film is about, and or not what the film is about. What fuels Ralphie's madness and his kind of fragmented psyche is that he's kind of dropping into these different spaces and these different worlds. Um, and there's something quite compartmentalized about it.
Yes. What was your favorite scene to write, and then what was your favorite scene to see come to life?
Um, I think, I think the sex scene in the middle of the film with Sashil um, was was I mean, it's an intense scene, and it's an upsetting scene. But it was really exciting to plan it with these 2 actors and to shoot the whole thing in a continuous take. Um, so it was a quite a technical exercise in setting up that shot and playing it out. Um, but the fact that it was done in this single take, um, under this, in this kind of crazy space in this factory, I don't know, there was just something very exciting about that moment of shooting it and pulling it off, and the amount of trust that the actors had in each other and in me and in the crew. It felt very special.
Yes, awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about this film. Congrats on this, and I look forward to talking to you about future projects.
It's a huge pleasure. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.